The fluorescent lights of the military rehabilitation wing buzzed softly above, casting a sterile glow across the pale green floor. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic, but beneath it lingered something warmer. Leather, dog fur, and the unmistakable scent of duty left undone. Sergeant Aldrich A.J. Fenwick sat in his wheelchair, the white cast around his leg pristine yet heavy. Like a monument to the moment everything changed. His uniform was neat, but his eyes told a different story. They were haunted, always scanning the corners of the room as if looking for something or someone. It had been 4 years since the explosion in Kandahar. 4 years since the mission went sideways and the fire swallowed the ground beneath them. 4 years since he last saw the one creature that had saved his life more times than he could count. The others had moved on. They saluted, they grieved, and they got reassigned. But AJ never did. Not truly. Something had stayed behind in the desert dust, buried beneath silence and classified reports. And now, unexpectedly, it was walking back toward him. 4 legs, steel eyes, and a heart that remembered. Bram was his name. A military working dog with a jaw like iron and instincts sharper than any blade. Assigned to AJ when he was just a rookie handler, Bram was more than a partner. He was rhythm. He was breath. They had communicated without words, moved as one through enemy terrain. Until the day the blast separated them. AJ had been told the dog didn't survive. Told that nothing could have lived through that heat. He had buried Bram in his mind 1,000 times until today. The sound of nails tapping against linoleum echoed in the corridor before the shepherd appeared at the doorway. A hush fell over the group of soldiers standing nearby. AJ's heart stopped. His breath caught somewhere between memory and disbelief. The dog stepped forward slowly, cautiously, as if testing whether the vision before him was real. Bram's head tilted, ears perked. Then, without hesitation, he trotted forward and pressed his face against AJ's chest. AJ broke. The dam inside him ruptured with a single sob that ripped from his throat before he could stop it. His arms wrapped around the thick neck of the dog, pulling him close, burying his face in the familiar fur. The smell hit him first, earthy, alive. Bram didn't move. He stood like a statue, allowing his handler to collapse into him, anchoring him like he always had. The hallway disappeared. Time stilled. In that moment, war, pain, surgeries, nightmares. None of it mattered. Just the dog. Just the heartbeat he thought he'd lost. Around them, no one spoke. No one dared to interrupt. But within that silence, 1,000 unasked questions flickered across the eyes of those watching. How had Bram survived? Where had he been all this time? And why had he come back now after everything? And yet, beneath those questions, one thing was certain. This reunion was no accident. The story isn't over yet. AJ and Bram's reunion is just the beginning. And our channel is so close to hitting 100,000 subscribers. If you felt the emotion, drop a like and subscribe now. Be part of this incredible journey with us. That night, AJ couldn't sleep. He lay in his hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles that looked more like cracks in memory than architecture. Bram lay curled beside the bed, not in the corner like a regular dog might, but close. So close that AJ could hear the subtle rhythm of his breathing. It was a sound he had memorized years ago, in tents and trenches, during endless nights overseas. And now, somehow, it was back. But the comfort it brought was laced with something darker, a chill that came from not knowing how. Captain Alira Rowe was the first to knock the next morning. She was precise, sharp-featured, and known for keeping her emotions locked behind her clipped words and tidy uniform. But even she hesitated at the sight of Bram laying beside AJ. Alert but calm. "I reviewed the incident records again," she said, stepping inside with a folder clutched tightly in her hand. The dog unit was officially listed as Kia. There was no recovery, no sighting, nothing. Her eyes met AJ's. And yet, here he is. AJ ran his fingers through Bram's fur, noting scars he didn't remember. Thin, raised lines across the dog's shoulder and flank. "Somebody lied," he said quietly, not accusatory, just hollow, like a truth spoken too late to matter. Or somebody covered something up. It was hard to say which option disturbed him more. Bram had been more than military equipment. He was family. And the thought that someone had kept his survival a secret, that someone had kept him away on purpose, Ro hesitated before handing over the folder. "There's something else," she said. "Last week, a private security firm tried to access your military file. They didn't go through official channels. We flagged it." That was enough to jolt AJ upright. The pain in his leg flared, but it didn't matter. "What firm?" he asked, voice rough. Ro gave him a name, Graythorn Solutions. It meant nothing to him. Not yet, but Bram's reaction said otherwise. The dog, calm just a moment ago, stood up stiffly, ears back, body tense. His gaze was fixed on the folder, as if something in it had triggered a memory far more vivid than AJ could imagine. He growled, not loudly, but with deep, rumbling intent. It wasn't fear, it was recognition, and that changed everything. The walls of the briefing room were lined with memories AJ wished he could forget. Maps of countries he'd bled in, faded flags, and plaques engraved with names he'd once known. But today, the room wasn't just a reminder of the past. It was a window into something darker, something that had been hiding beneath the surface for years. Captain Alira Rose stood at the head of the table, a stack of confidential reports resting beside her. Bram sat by AJ's side, motionless yet alert. His ears twitched at the faintest shuffle of paper, his eyes flickering between the humans in the room, as if he too sensed the weight of what was about to be revealed. Ro cleared her throat before she spoke, her voice unusually measured. "After you were airlifted from Kandahar," she began, "your unit filed a standard incident report. Bram was presumed killed in action. No remains were found. But the fire damage made identification near impossible." She paused, letting the gravity settle. But 3 months later there were irregularities. A private contractor began submitting unverified canine behavioral logs to a black-level system. The dog ID code matched Bram's last registry, though the chip was supposedly deactivated. She glanced at AJ, waiting to see if it clicked. He gripped the arms of his wheelchair tightly, feeling the dull throb in his injured leg echo with a sharper pain in his chest. "So, someone recovered him," he muttered, piecing it together aloud. "But instead of returning him to the military, they kept him. For what? Experimentation." The word tasted bitter. Bram wasn't just some tool. He had instincts, memories, loyalty. He had choices. Whatever had been done to him had ripped away not just time, but something deeper. Something sacred between handler and dog. Ro nodded slowly. "There's reason to believe that Bram was taken by a subsidiary of Graythorn Solutions," she said, pulling up a satellite image on the screen. It showed a heavily secured facility tucked into a barren expanse of desert. This compound operated without oversight, likely running off-book trials, behavioral conditioning, sensory augmentation, even loyalty manipulation. Her voice lowered. "We believe Bram was part of a program they called Echo Retrieval, designed to see if dogs could be reprogrammed to identify and return to original handlers, regardless of mental disruption." AJ stared at Bram, whose body remained still but whose eyes seemed to burn with a strange intensity, as if some hidden command still pulsed behind them. "He didn't just find me," AJ whispered. "They sent him, or he escaped, and followed a trace they left behind." The room seemed to shift around him as realization sank in. Bram's scars weren't just from war. They were signs of something colder, clinical. And yet, despite it all, he had come back. To him, that part, at least, was real. But if Bram had been through that kind of conditioning, it meant one terrifying thing. Someone out there knew exactly where AJ was, and they might not be finished with either of them. The hospital had grown quieter as the sun slipped behind the horizon, leaving long streaks of gold across the linoleum floor. AJ sat by the window in his wheelchair, Bram resting at his feet with the stillness of a sentinel. There was something about dusk that always made him uneasy. Something about the way the light left and the silence settled in its place. It reminded him of the minutes before a firefight, when the world held its breath just before chaos shattered it. That night, the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. He had spent the day revisiting every memory he had with Bram. Every patrol, every close call, every moment the dog had sensed danger before it happened. Now, he was beginning to question whether those instincts had been sharpened or replaced. Could loyalty be engineered? Could memory be rewired? He didn't want to believe that Bram's return was part of some program. He wanted to believe it was real, that despite everything they had done to him, Bram had chosen to come back. But belief and truth weren't always the same. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Ajay wheeled himself over slowly, muscles aching from the tension he'd carried all day. A nurse handed him a plain, unmarked envelope. "This came through the front gate," she said softly. "No return address, just your name on it." He closed the door and turned it over in his hands. Bram already standing, ears up, nose twitching with suspicion. Ajay opened it carefully, revealing a single sheet of paper inside. There were only 4 words typed in the center of the page. "He remembers more than you." No signature, no explanation, just those chilling words, printed in bold, sterile font. Ajay's blood ran cold. He looked at Bram, whose eyes were fixed on the letter like he could read it, understand it, or worse, had been expecting it. This wasn't random. This was a warning, or a test. Someone was watching. Someone wanted Ajay to know that the story wasn't finished, and that Bram's memories were the key to something much bigger. He called Captain Rowe immediately. "They're playing with us," he said, reading the message aloud. She was silent for a long time on the other end. "We've been compromised," she finally said. "Whoever took Bram, they're not done. And if what he remembers is dangerous to them, they'll come for him." Her voice dropped. "Or you." The line went dead before he could respond. Ajay stared at the phone, heart pounding. For the first time since the ambush years ago, he felt the same paralyzing certainty. The war had followed him home. That night he didn't sleep. Neither did Bram. They both kept watch, man and dog, bound by something deeper than memory, haunted by something neither of them could yet name. But one thing was now clear. The past hadn't just returned. It was knocking on their door. It happened just after 3 a.m. Ajay was still awake, his eyes stinging from exhaustion, but his mind too alert to rest. Bram had been pacing for nearly an hour, moving from door to window with increasing agitation. That alone wasn't unusual. He had always been sensitive to changes in the environment. But tonight, his body language was different, focused, predatory. Then suddenly he froze. One paw lifted mid-step, ears upright, eyes fixed on the hallway outside the room. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Ajay reached for his crutches, instincts kicking in before reason could catch up. He moved to the door slowly, his heart pounding so loud he thought it might echo. Just as he placed his hand on the handle, the hallway lights outside flickered. Once, twice, then went dark. Every muscle in his body tensed. This wasn't a power outage. This was intentional. Bram pressed against his leg, a silent signal they had used in the field. Danger was near. Before he could open the door, it was pushed inward. 2 men stepped into the room wearing hospital scrubs, but there was nothing medical in their eyes. Cold, professional. One carried a syringe, the other a small black device that blinked silently in his palm. "We're here for the dog," one of them said. His voice was calm, practiced, like he'd done this before. "You don't want to get in the way, Sergeant." The next moment moved fast, too fast for a man in a wheelchair, but not too fast for Bram. The shepherd lunged before the man could take a step forward, teeth bared, full force colliding with the stranger's chest and sending him crashing into the metal equipment tray. The second man raised the blinking device, but Ajay, fueled by raw instinct, swung one of his crutches with a full arc, knocking it from the man's hand and across the room. "You're not taking him," Ajay growled through clenched teeth. "Not again." The men didn't stay to finish the job. One was bleeding heavily from a bite to his arm, and the other scrambled to grab his partner and retreat. Within moments they were gone, vanishing down the hallway before security ever reached the floor. Bram stood at the door, his chest heaving, blood on his muzzle, but his eyes burning with something more than adrenaline. It was clarity, recognition. He knew those men, not just their scent, but who they were. AJ stared at his dog, his breathing uneven, mind spinning. Whoever these people were, they weren't finished. They had come without a trace, without backup, which meant this wasn't just about science or memory or secrets. This was personal, and now it was war. If you were in AJ's place right now, what would you do? Would you trust your instincts or your dog's? Let us know in the comments. What's your next move when danger's already inside the room? We're watching for the smartest, boldest, or wildest answers. The morning light did nothing to chase away the heaviness that had settled over the room. Hospital security had done their sweep, filed their reports, and offered reassurances AJ didn't believe for a second. The men who came for Bram weren't amateurs. They didn't care about cameras, guards, or consequences. They had expected to succeed. And the fact that they hadn't, that was going to bring retaliation. AJ could feel it in his bones. Something was coming, and it wasn't finished with him or Bram. Captain Rowe returned just after sunrise, her face harder than he had ever seen it. She closed the door behind her and sat across from AJ without a word for several seconds. Finally, she said, "They weren't contractors, not official ones. No records, no facial matches. Their IDs were ghosts." She tossed a photo onto the table, grainy, pulled from hospital surveillance. One of the men had a faint tattoo peeking out from under his collar. AJ leaned forward, studying it, and then his heart stopped. It was the insignia from his old unit. Not a military brand, not a flag, but a symbol only a handful of soldiers had used during Black Ops deployments. An unofficial mark passed between men who operated outside of protocol, who obeyed orders that were never written down. "That's impossible," AJ whispered. "We disbanded after Kandahar. Half those guys didn't make it back." His mind reeled. What if some of them had been recruited? Bought? What if Bram hadn't been the only thing taken from the wreckage of that mission? Bram let out a low whine and nudged AJ's cast gently, sensing the shift in him. The room felt smaller now, pressurized, like every truth he'd been running from was folding in on him at once. If Graythorn or whoever was truly behind them had ties to his former unit, then they didn't just know how he thought. They trained him to think that way. That meant every move he made from here on out, they'd anticipate. They weren't just coming for Bram. They were drawing AJ out. For something. "I need to leave this place," AJ said, voice flat. "Now. Today." Rowe didn't argue. She handed him a file. An address scrawled in black ink across the top. "This is the last known location tied to a former handler from your unit. Nathaniel Voss. He disappeared 3 years ago after being discharged for psychological instability." AJ narrowed his eyes. Voss had been one of the best. Paranoid, brilliant, dangerous. And if he'd gone underground, he might be the only person who understood what was really going on. AJ looked down at Bram, who hadn't taken his eyes off the door since Rowe entered. "You ready, boy?" he whispered. Bram's tail didn't wag. He simply stood, waiting, watching, always alert. They both knew what this meant. The only way forward now was through the fire. The road to the mountains was long, winding, and deserted, perfect for disappearing. AJ sat in the passenger seat of the government SUV, his crutches tucked beside him. Bram in the back with his head resting between the seats. Every mile further from the hospital felt like a step into something deeper than danger. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about truth. Ugly, buried, and clawing its way back to the surface. The air outside grew colder as they climbed, and with it, AJ's memories thickened. He remembered Nathaniel Voss vividly. How he used to sit alone after missions, scribbling diagrams into a weathered notebook, whispering theories no one took seriously. Voss had always believed their unit was part of something larger. Not just war but design, controlled chaos. When the ambush in Kandahar happened, Voss claimed it wasn't an accident, that they had been set up. Most thought the trauma had broken him. But now, as the GPS counted down the final turns, AJ wondered if Voss had just seen the truth before the rest of them. They arrived at a crumbling cabin buried in pine trees and shadows. The property was ringed with old motion detectors and makeshift barricades. Signs of someone who trusted no one. Bram growled softly as they approached, but AJ placed a calming hand on his back. "Easy," he whispered. "If he's still alive, he'll be watching us right now." And he was right. The cabin door creaked open before they even reached it, and a man stepped out, older, gaunt, with a rifle in hand and suspicion carved into every line of his face. "AJ Fenwick," the man said, not quite surprised. His voice was rough, as if it hadn't been used in months. "Didn't expect you to be the one they'd send to kill me." AJ raised his hands slowly. "I'm not here to kill you, Voss. I'm here because I think you were right. About everything." For a long moment the rifle didn't lower. Bram tensed beside him, ready. Then, slowly Voss lowered the weapon and stepped aside. "Then you better come in," he said, "because if they sent you, it means they're almost here." Inside, the cabin was a shrine to paranoia. Walls covered in maps, notes, red string, military documents, and photos that shouldn't exist. In the center of it all was a weathered folder labeled Project Echo. AJ reached for it, but Voss stopped him. "You sure you want to know what they did to him?" he asked, his voice quiet now. "To your dog?" AJ met his gaze without flinching. "I need to know." Voss nodded. "Then sit down, brother, because this goes deeper than either of us ever thought." Bram didn't move from the doorway. His eyes stayed fixed on the trees outside, body taut, as if the ghosts from Kandahar were finally catching up. The folder was heavier than it looked. AJ opened it with trembling fingers, the air inside the cabin thick with tension. Bram sat nearby, ears alert but body still, like he, too, knew what was about to be uncovered. The first page was a classified memorandum stamped with a date that made AJ's breath hitch. Just 2 weeks after the Kandahar ambush. "This was already in motion," he whispered. "Before the mission. Before we were hit." Voss nodded grimly. "We were never meant to succeed. We were the trial run." As AJ flipped through the documents, the truth came in pieces. Disorienting, horrifying. Project Echo wasn't just about reprogramming dogs. It was about pair bonding through trauma. Handlers and canines were deliberately exposed to life-or-death situations to strengthen emotional imprinting. The ultimate goal wasn't just loyalty. It was obedience born from shared fear and loss. They weren't training dogs, Voss said bitterly. They were weaponizing grief, testing how far they could bend the mind before it broke. Bram had survived the blast, but he hadn't been rescued. He'd been retrieved, taken by operatives working under Greythorn's experimental wing. Over the next several years, they subjected him to surgical tracking implants, sensory deprivation, reassociation training, all designed to suppress his original handler bond. But something went wrong, or perhaps something went right. He broke the programming, AJ said, voice low. That's why he came back. He remembered what they tried to erase. Voss leaned back, eyes hollow. You weren't supposed to remember either. But your injury kept you under radar, too unstable, too wounded to be worth watching. And now you've reconnected. He gestured at Bram. That makes both of you dangerous. You're proof the experiment failed. AJ felt the weight of it settle over him like armor and ash. Everything, his injury, his trauma, the years of silence, it hadn't been chance. It had been designed, controlled, watched. But the connection they thought they could manipulate had turned into something stronger than they anticipated. Bram's return wasn't just a reunion. It was rebellion. A fracture in a system that depended on silence and separation. And now someone was trying desperately to seal that crack. They'll come here, AJ said, to finish what they started. Voss nodded. They already are. I've seen the drones circling for 2 nights now. You've got maybe 12 hours. AJ looked at Bram, whose eyes met his with perfect clarity. There were no doubts between them now. No confusion. No hesitation. Whatever was coming, they would face it the same way they had always faced the world. Together. But this time there would be no rescue, no backup, only truth and war. The first sign was the hum. Not loud, but deep, like a distant storm rolling beneath the earth. AJ stood at the cabin window, eyes narrowed at the Trilene. Voss was already moving through the cabin with calm precision, loading the few weapons he still trusted. Bram stood at the center of the room, his body low, ears locked forward, tail rigid. He wasn't just sensing movement. He was anticipating it. Outside, the forest held its breath, until the first flash of motion broke through the underbrush. 3 figures emerged, dressed in black tactical gear, their faces masked and rifles raised. They didn't shout warnings. They didn't negotiate. These men weren't here to retrieve anything. They were here to erase. The air cracked with the first burst of gunfire, shattering the cabin's front window. AJ dropped instantly, dragging himself behind an overturned table as shards rained down. Bram didn't hesitate. With a low snarl, he charged toward the back entrance, flanking instinctively, just like he had in the desert all those years ago. Voss took up position at the kitchen doorway, returning fire with precise, practiced bursts. "We hold them as long as we can," he shouted over the gunfire. "You get him out if I fall." AJ grabbed the pistol Voss had tossed him earlier, bracing his casted leg against the wall for balance. "We're not leaving you," he growled. But Voss only gave a grim smile. "Some debts you don't walk away from, Fenwick." And then he was gone, vanishing into the smoke and gunfire that now filled the forest edge. Minutes passed like hours. One of the attackers was down, unmoving near the woodpile. Bram emerged from the shadows like a ghost, his jaws stained and eyes locked with purpose. But there were more coming. Drones hummed above now, low-flying and scanning, their red lights slicing through the mist. AJ's mind raced. They weren't just trying to silence him. They were trying to wipe clean the last trace of what Project Echo had created. If he and Bram died here, the truth would die with them. And then the cabin caught fire. A gas can in the corner had taken a round, and flames spread like a curse through the dry wood. Smoke filled AJ's lungs as he crawled toward Bram, coughing, disoriented, hearing gunfire fade into something more distant, like memory unraveling. "Bram, come!" he shouted, barely able to see. The dog appeared through the smoke, muzzle burned, eyes still sharp. He pressed his head against AJ's side, guiding him through the back door, step by agonizing step. Behind them, a final explosion rocked the cabin. Wood, fire, and shrapnel ripping through the air. AJ looked back once and saw Voss standing in the Inferno's center, weapon raised, holding the line alone, until the fire swallowed him whole. There was no time to mourn, only to run. 3 weeks had passed since the fire. AJ sat on a worn wooden bench at the edge of a quiet cemetery in northern Montana, the kind of place where the wind speaks louder than people. His cast was gone, replaced by a brace he barely noticed anymore. Bram lay at his feet, calm, his fur still singed near the muzzle, a mark he would carry for the rest of his life. They were both healing, though not in ways that anyone could measure with charts or bandages. Some wounds you just learn to carry. The grave marker was simple. No rank, no official emblem, just a name, Nathaniel Voss. AJ had insisted on that. Voss had spent years running from ghosts, trying to warn people who refused to listen. In the end, he hadn't just saved AJ and Bram. He'd bought them the time they needed to do what had to be done. And AJ had done it. The files, the evidence, the truth behind Project Echo. He had leaked it all. Quietly, strategically. Enough to expose Greythorn's network without putting innocent people in the crossfire. Of course, there were threats. There were always threats. But something had shifted after the leak. Someone, maybe inside the system, had protected him. Maybe it was because of who he was. Or maybe, just maybe, someone still believed that loyalty and sacrifice meant something. Either way, no one had come for them since. The silence that followed wasn't peace, but it was survivable. Bram stirred, his ears twitching at the sound of a car pulling into the nearby dirt road. AJ turned slightly, watching as a young woman stepped out. Uniformed, clean-cut, but with the cautious eyes of someone who knew the cost of truth. "Agent Millen," She introduced herself softly, walking over. "I just wanted to say, thank you. What you did. It's already changing things." AJ didn't respond right away. He looked down at Bram, then back up at her. "Just make sure no one ever tries that again," he said. "Dogs aren't weapons, and grief isn't a tool." She nodded and left without pushing for more. AJ appreciated that. There was nothing more to say. He and Bram had done what they came to do. But as the sun dipped lower behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the cemetery, he realized something strange. He didn't feel empty. For the first time in years, he felt anchored. Not to the past, not even to the mission, but to the only thing that had ever truly made sense. The bond between a soldier and his dog. As they walked back to the truck, side by side, AJ felt the weight of it all settle behind him. Not erased, but accepted. Life wouldn't be easy, but it would be honest. Bram looked up at him once, just a glance, and AJ smiled, because sometimes what survives the war is exactly what saves you. If the story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Here we share powerful stories of loyalty, sacrifice, and love that deserve to be remembered. Turn on the notification bell and don't miss the next story that proves some bonds never die.